Okay, you've heard a little bit geopolitically, you've heard a little bit from a government and funding perspective, you heard certainly some great stories and capabilities and advances from the commercial world. Our next panel is actually going to be on recommendations for the next administration for quantum technologies. And our moderator for this panel is Ms. Linda Lourie. She's a principal with WestExec Advisors and is an advisor to the US government on foreign investment, export controls, and commercial dual-use technologies. Previously, she was Assistant Director for Research and Technology Security in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy. And again, this panel will discuss the recommendations that would go before our next administration. So with that, please welcome Ms. Linda Lourie.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that kind welcome. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm just sorry that our friend Jacqueline Tame, who was meant to moderate, has come down sick this morning, but I'm pleased to pitch in. There aren't two more qualified people to speak on this topic than the Honorable Ellen Lord and Bill Greenwalt, and I'm so pleased to be on this panel to share our thoughts with you on what the next administration, how the next administration needs to be thinking about quantum, regardless of who it is, and who's the next president and how the next Congress is being constituted. I'd like to have our panelists each introduce themselves because they come with such a wealth of information and experience both in government and outside. So please, Ellen, if you might want to introduce yourself.
Thank you, Linda, and good morning. I appreciate being here. Again, my name is Ellen Lord. I spent 33 years in industry in a multi-industry global conglomerate. 11 of those were in automotive and then 22 in aerospace and defense. I then went into the Department of Defense working for the Secretary of Defense in 2017 as the Undersecretary of Acquisition and Sustainment. However, the first 6 months of that tour of duty, if you will, were spent bifurcating what used to be acquisition, technology, and logistics into two offices, acquisition and sustainment, and research and engineering. I became Undersecretary for Acquisition and Sustainment, but I have a great love of research and engineering as I started off life as a chemist. So fast forward to today, I serve on public, private equity, and venture-backed boards, as well as advisories, as well as working with Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab and MIT Lincoln Laboratories as an advisor. So I'm really excited to be here with my good friends Linda and Bill. I guess it's over to you.
Thank you. I'm Bill Greenwalt. I spent most of my career up on Capitol Hill in the Senate Armed Services Committees, the Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs Committee on the Senate side, and the House Appropriations Committee. I also spent time in the Department of Defense as the Deputy Undersecretary for Industrial Policy and did some time in the private sector. Currently, I'm a senior fellow at the American Enterprise Institute. I'm also a co-founder of the Silicon Valley Defense Group, and as Ellen's on boards and advisory boards and so on. So happy to be here, and hopefully we can answer some of your thoughts about this next administration.
So let's get down to brass tacks. It's January 20. There's a new president who walks into the White House. There's a new Secretary of Defense. I was a career government official. I served 5 presidents, 9 secretaries of defense. I've seen this close up. You have a new Secretary of Defense who gathers the top leadership and says, hopefully some of them have been confirmed already, and says, this quantum thing, what is it? What do I need to know? And what are we going to do about it? And the interesting thing from my perspective as a career official is that the political officials come in and they know they have 4 years to achieve their objectives, and they first have to figure out what their objectives are. So Ellen, could you talk about some of the things when you walked into the Pentagon, what were the kinds of questions you would have asked of your career personnel and of your political deputies of what you needed to know about quantum?
Absolutely. My particular focus was at the intersection of industry, particularly from a technology point of view, and then our national security, our national defense. And one of the things I realized was that whereas 60 years ago or so, when our acquisition system was put into place, the government funded most of our research and development, in other words, most of our innovation. Today we have the flipped situation where commercial industry is funding most of that. So the question I would have coming in is how do we embrace the fact that the government needs to understand and acquire what industry is doing with their own capital investments, their own internal research and development, whereas our DoD bureaucracy, if you will, is slowly turning that way. We have to fast forward. So that would be number one. How do we embrace that? But then I would go back to first principles and say, what guides what we do in the Department of Defense? And I think it's important to realize that within government, when we are talking about highly technical solutions, often it's the Department of Defense that in the interagency, as we call it, all the cabinet positions within the government, who lead on the first applications, because we have this burning platform, if you will, of homeland security and working with our partners and allies. So I would say, okay, how do we embrace emerging technologies to make sure that we are beginning to apply them towards warfighting needs, whether that be in times of peace, gray zone conflict, or all-out kinetic warfare? And in order to do that, we have to move beyond just basic research on emerging technologies. And obviously, quantum is one that is very, very important. And the US has funded a lot of basic research. But my view is we need to get out of the labs and get into some applications. And what I would suggest is we need to have the government partner with industry and look at those really critical problems that quantum can solve. So for instance, say that our low Earth orbit satellites are taken out and we no longer have GPS. We need precision navigation and timing, not only from a warfighter point of view to know where we are, have communications, but for our economy, for the New York Stock Exchange to actually function. So we have this nexus between our economic security and our national security that we need to understand. So I would go back to our national security strategy, our national defense strategy, our defense planning guidance, and see where this quantum technology can fit and serve to meet our gaps.
And who would you talk to in the Pentagon to gather this information?
Great question. Everything in DC is a campaign. No one person can do anything. So I would talk to the policy individuals. I'd talk to the research individuals. I'd talk to the acquisition individuals. And fundamentally, we need to define what is quantum technology. People, the average citizen does not know that. I would assume, which is always dangerous to do, that about 99% of the people in the Pentagon and throughout DoD globally do not know what quantum is. So A, define it, and then talk to the policy individuals, the research and engineering individuals, the acquisition professionals, and make sure that we are educating everyone at the National Defense University, Defense Acquisition University, as to what this is. And I would also say that let's make sure we make use of all of those bilateral frameworks we have set up to work with partners and allies, because one thing that distinguishes the US is when we go to battle, so to speak, we do not go alone.
Well, let me, as your former lawyer in the Pentagon, I noticed you didn't include the lawyers in your
Okay,
research.
so I could go on and on. I know Bill these, so let me make two things. Lawyers are incredibly important because unlike when I was in commercial industry and we just said, what does the customer need? The minute I switched over to aerospace and defense, the first question always was, what does the contract say? And it took me a while to kind of understand the context of that. But you're absolutely right, because we have a lot of statute that Congress drafts. Bill did a lot of that. But then there's the interpretation of that. What is the intent? And then what's the implementation guidance? I also, frankly, left out, because I thought I was talking too much, we need to go to the Hill. Because whereas DOD, we're the war fighters. I say we, I'm not there anymore. But basically, our strategy is approved by Congress, and all of our dollars come from Congress. Just a quick analogy, when I went into DOD, I was pretty ignorant about how government works, and I was trying to draw commercial analogies. So if you are at DOD, and I was in the office of the Secretary of Defense, meaning on the staff of the Secretary of Defense, that basically is analogous to a corporate group. It's smaller, only deals with the highest dollar items, the highest risks items. Then the operating units, who in a business are generating the money and so forth and so on, the analogy at DOD is those are the military services, the Navy, the Air Force, the Army. And then instead of us in business having 7, 9, 11, maybe 13 people on a board of directors, DOD is blessed with a little under 550, and they're called Congress. So it is a very complicated dialogue. So working with Congress is very, very important.
Right, that's a great segue, Bill, from your Hill experience. How would you see working with the new administration? How would you counsel a new administration, especially if it's the same party, but as a professional staff member in general, about authorities and funding authorities?
No, and it's even worse, as Ellen knows. There's 535 board of directors, and then there's all that staff.
Very well staffed.
Who think they're independently
very
elected.
At some point. So, yeah, no, I mean, you know, the administration has 4 years. And so it needs to develop a compelling case. It needs to get some near-term wins. And just at DOD, there are 14 critical emerging technologies right now. Quantum is one of them. So there's an incredible competition for funding, for programs, for where to put one's efforts and time and money. And so the administration needs to come out with an action plan to Congress right out of the gate on where it wants to go. And you know, if it's beyond 4 years, which may be a lot of quantum computing type of applications, you know, that's kind of for the next administration, and you just kind of keep the funding going in the research and development. But if you really want to create buzz and create momentum, you're going to need some near-term wins, and that means what is out there. And that's what the Congress would be asking. What needs does the department have that can be filled in the next 1, 2, 3 years with this technology? And if there aren't none, any, well then something else is going to emerge ahead of time. So they need to have a plan. They need to have where is the technology? Where's the commercial sector? Who can we partner with? And how quickly can we get capability out into the field?
So we're in Washington, and I know a lot of people are visiting Washington, and the one word I haven't heard from either of you was our competitor, our pacing challenge in the East, which is China. Can you each talk about how much the competition is driving quantum search among our allies and partners, research and development among allies and partners, and the importance of allies and partners in essentially in this pacing challenge that we're all focused on here?
Let me just kind of start. First of all, the commercial sector is incredibly important. Well, that commercial sector is not just a U.S. sector. It is a sector that has partnerships around the world. And the government has to ensure that those partnerships can continue to work. Absolutely. The Chinese threat, the competition with China, both economically and a national security standpoint, is going to be one of those incredibly difficult pathways we have to work our way through. The first is that obviously we don't want to have all of we don't want to be the research and development unit for the Chinese Communist Party. So we have to ensure that the U.S. government and also commercial sector is not actively supporting that. We'll do that with export controls and things like that. At the same time, we have to make sure that those aren't create barriers to working with our closest allies, and that's incredibly important. So that's the fine line that has to be walked on many of these technologies and many of these issue areas.
Yeah, building on what Bill said, one thing that I learned going into government is no one agency goes it alone. So DOD on the really big decisions has to get buy-in from State Department, Commerce Department, the U.S. Trade Representative, Treasury, and so forth and so on. What is interesting about that is the fact that you learn that, frankly, we strategically compete on many different levels, whether it's export controls, whether it be tariffs, whether it be things like CFIUS, countering foreign investment in the United States, not allowing certain companies to be acquired or certain real estate even to be acquired because it's of national strategic interest. You've got to work with everyone and educate everyone. So this happens at all different levels. I mentioned bilats before. Probably, NATO is
bilateral agreements and
bilateral
conversations.
One-on-one, one country to another.
Not to have so much
exchanges.
Washington speak.
I know, it's horrible. I'm always correcting people, and here I'm a victim of it. But in other words, we need to leverage all of this framework of institutional meetings that happen in a certain cadence. Because that's when you get people coming to the table. And unfortunately, when you're in government, you have so many meetings you have to do, far, far more than you have in industry that are sort of pro forma, you have to show up. So the trick of it is to take those pro forma meetings and insert content into them that's critical to your mission. So what we really need to do is through these individual one-on-one meetings and then group meetings, whether it be NATO meetings, whether it be the Five Power, something I worked on. So UK, Italy, Germany, I'm coming to that,
right.
US, AUKUS, very, very important, Australia and the US. I mean, Australia has become geopolitically absolutely critical to the U.S., given the tyranny of distance and the threats we have in South China Sea and all throughout Indo-PACOM from that theater point of view. So this is really a multi-dimensional game of chess where, again, with all these different emerging technologies that are going to be the difference, I believe, between overmatch and not, we have to pick those that make a difference. And coming back to quantum, I think one of the earlier speakers this morning was talking about how the efficiency of compute, if you will, is so much less constraining on energy resources, processing centers, which, as we all know, are the greatest consumers of energy today. We need to think across our interagency, Department of Energy, about how quantum can be leveraged to make sure that we are making the most of our national resources and our constrained resources. So coming back to what does this government coming in, the new government, whichever one it might be, need to do, we need to think about, the theory of constraints here in terms of what we have to work with, our homeland security, our economic security, the security of our allies and partners that all believe in a certain rules-based world order, and determine how we leverage technology to the best ends for all of us. And that's where quantum, whether we're talking about compute, whether we're talking about sensing, whether we're talking about networking, really is, I believe, at the precipice. And that's where I believe this next administration needs to dive into the use cases, needs to start getting that experiential learning of applying quantum technology to everyday problems.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I was just going to mention, when I was general counsel at the Defense Innovation Unit out in Silicon Valley, we worked closely with warfighters. We paired warfighters with startups to make sure that it wasn't the technology that we were buying, it's the use case we were buying. And I think that's and that's even more important in quantum, because quantum, people's eyes glaze over. They don't understand it, they think it's cool, gee whiz. But the goal is really, especially when you're dealing with policymakers, or people, consumers, the warfighter, is how can I make your life better? How can I solve your problems? How can I help you reach your objectives? And that's what we're all trying to do. And Bill, I imagine you see that on the Hill. Even more so, because the Hill's focusing on solving problems.
No, absolutely. It has to be a mission focus. It has to be, is this technology relevant to missions near term, midterm, and long term? And what is the use case? And then how can users actually get a hold of this technology and do something with it? And frankly, if that you can't get to that point, it's going to be very difficult to get funding. It's going to be very difficult to get the momentum and the compelling case that's out there. I think there are a number of compelling cases that can be made, but they have to be made with this next administration coming in for this technology to take off, so to speak.
So, what can we do? I think this is really a communications campaign. And the people participating in this conference are very well kind of schooled in what quantum is. The challenge in my mind is translating that into written and verbal communication that your next door neighbor, who doesn't happen to be a PhD software engineer, can understand. So we collectively have to make the case for what are the benefits of quantum, what are the differentiators, how can it be applied to not only promote our economic security, but our national security and that of our partners and allies.
This has been terrific. Those of you who don't come from this country, I'm sure you're going to be, interested in hearing all this talk these days about the new administration. Of course, we have the debate tonight. What's the chance quantum's going to come up in the debate?
Very low.
I would say the same. Any critical technology, probably very low. But you never know.
We can always hope.
Yes,
I
exactly.
think there might be, a China question, a national security question. But those of us who are interested in quantum can read between the lines, and I'm sure there's going to be a great deal to watch.
We'll text it in.
We'll text it in. Well, great. Thank you so much. This has been great fun. And
thank you
looking
all.
forward to January 20th.
All right.